And if you really want to bring out a slightly different flavor, throw it in a pan with a little bit of olive oil and brown it up just a hair. And give you a real nice flavor with that olive oil. Now, one other thing about this sauce is it's not, you don't have to do the sauce like this. You can actually just throw all the ingredients I'm using right now straight into the roasting pan, throw it in the oven. The amount of time it's in there, it's going to bring the sauce to a boil, and it's going to do basically everything we're doing right now. The only upside to doing it separate is that you're going to cook the flavors into one another more directly. So the sauce is going to be that concentrated flavor, and then that is going to bake into everything else. Oh, I love that garlic smell. Now, when we think about the Mediterranean, there are certain things that just come to mind. You know, the Greek islands, gods from heaven knows where, olives, balsamic vinegar, garlic. You know, take all of those images and put that into your cooking, which is how we're going to do our sauce. So, add a little bit of balsamic vinegar. For those of you who want an exact measurement, I'm going to say to taste. A little bit of taste is going to be about half a tablespoon, so 1.5 teaspoons. A lot of taste is going to be a tablespoon and up. You can also substitute the balsamic vinegar for red wine, white wine. Probably even use a little bit of ouzo if you don't mind the star anise flavor. Just can be a little strong for some people. Tastes like licorice. So on top of that, we're going to add all of those other staples. Since this is not a Greek dish, this is just something I've created that reminds me of the Mediterranean. I'm also going to throw in oregano, fresh ground pepper, once again to taste. Slight taste, 1.5 teaspoons. Something like oregano, basil, you can use a little bit more, especially because they're such a light taste. So you can go probably at least a tablespoon of each of those. If you don't mind spicy food, I prefer to throw in a little bit of cayenne pepper. Peppers are a whole different story. And of course, paprika. A lot of people don't recognize it as having its own flavor, but when you top it onto something, you don't taste it very much. Once it starts to cook and the flavor settles into it, it comes out, it brings out that spice so much. So on its own, it's not much, but it does pack a kick after a little while. Hummus the next day, that's when you taste it. Alright, so we'll just return that to a simmer, let it go, and just let it go until those tomatoes and those onions we threw in are soft. Alright, so let's take a check on our sauce. It's starting to get real nice and smooth. A few good chunks, but so we're going to leave this on the burner, just on low heat to keep it warm, and we're going to start getting our roasting pan ready. Standard roast pan size. This is going to feed about 3 to 4 people, depending on how hungry everyone is, which I'm sure if they've been around smelling what I've been smelling, they're going to be pretty hungry. With something like a beef roast or a pork roast, you want to have a screen in there to keep the meat off from the bottom of the pan, otherwise it's going to sear and start sticking, just like when you're making eggs, right? So, instead of using a pan for this, we're going to use potatoes. I prefer baby potatoes just because they require a little bit less prep and they taste good. If you have a preference for potatoes, use that. Otherwise, if you're looking for a good potato to start, don't use russet potatoes. Russet potatoes are fantastic for baking and for making French fries. But when it comes to roasting potatoes, I prefer yellow, even a red, but for this particular occasion I'm using baby yellows. So cut them into however size bites you want. I prefer something about this size. Just enough that you can pop it in your mouth and have a nice big mouthful. So, chuck those in the pan. Same thing as the tomatoes. Wash your food. Good God, wash your food. One of the interesting things that we very rarely think about in this day and age is where our food comes from. Not so much, does it come from the grocery store, is it free-range meat, is it fair trade, but just where did all this stuff come from? Something like, potatoes that we all take for granted. Potatoes were originally domesticated in South America, if I'm remembering correctly. So we bitch and complain and think about how globalized our world's become. But when we think about Irish cooking and European cooking, we think, the potato. The potato is a staple of Irish cooking. It's actually not. It was introduced in the colonial era. And had it not been for the potato, most of Ireland probably would have starved to death. And now we're using it to make a Mediterranean dish when, in all honesty, it's a South American vegetable. Alright, so you want to get a good layer of potatoes, about 1 potato thick. 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4. Now we're going to throw a couple of tubers in there just to give it a little extra flavor. I prefer carrots. Just like onions, chop the first bit off. If there's any nasty bits, cut those out right away. And wash them first. Now, depending on how big you want them, is up to you. If you want them just there for flavor, chop them a little small. Me, I like having a big bite of carrot when I'm having this. So I'm going to go about 1 centimeter thick, a little more, a little less, depending. A lot of people I find that I run into who haven't cooked for a living or done a lot of knife work are really nervous about knives. So it's just like I tell every one of them, that when you're cutting, you have to think of a knife not in the sense of I'm holding a knife. You're not trying to take someone down. They're not breaking into your crib. The knife is supposed to be a part of your arm. So you want to hold it with, ideally, 2 fingers is really all you need. The other 3 fingers are there to stabilize, and then you're going to set it against your palm to keep it stable. Because you don't want your knife flopping around all over the place. That's how accidents happen. And then lock your wrist. The knife becomes part of your arm, not part of your hand and your fingers. You're not doing this. You're doing this. The whole arm is moving when you're doing it. Safest way to do it so you don't cut your fingers off is if you're coming up and down every time, the knife is going to bounce off the counter. When it bounces, you're going to bounce over to your hand. If the knife never leaves the surface, there's less of a chance you're going to cut yourself. So you want to just use your arm, subtle rocking motion, just zigzag it back and forth down the length of the carrot or whatever else you're chopping. This applies for anything. Use your arm. It's a part of you. It's not something you're holding. It's actually an extension of your arm. That'll keep you safe. Now, remember that onion we threw away? Or threw to the side. This one we're going to chop a little bit differently. Start by quartering it. And